Hello, ladies and gentlemen, 'tis I, Pure Note, and today I'm going to be dramatically reading to you. This fiction here is written by a friend of mine on fan-fiction, Jet Howitzer. Find a link to his page in the description. Entitled, I Would Give to You, a story of loss, a story of love, and finding oneself where he least expected. Alright, let's go. The monotonous tone of the train lulled you into a fitful sleep. The early hours certainly didn't help either. You left home less than 24 hours ago, and you've already missed the certain comforts offered there. Sure, you were going to be staying with your cousin, or so you had hoped, but it didn't make it any easier to leave home, and the reason for leaving would make it all the harder to face her. The scenery whipped past the train, reminding you of what you couldn't have. Just a few months ago, you'd been the best flyer in Philadelphia. Then there was the accident, and everything changed. No longer could you soar through the skies, and no longer could you reach out and touch the clouds. All of your dreams had been built around your unparalleled expertise at the sky. A soft, jerking motion shattered your dozing introspection as you knew the train was coming to a stop at Ponyville. You reached under the bench that had been your impromptu bed and grasped the single bag that held all of your belongings. You didn't need to look inside to know what was there, and the familiar weight was enough to settle your mind. You spotted the town well before coming to a stop, and somewhat familiar buildings sparked half-forgotten memories of the time spent playing in the streets. When the train finally grounded to a halt, you made your way to the door, and you waited for most of the passengers to leave before you did, as you didn't want to have to deal with being jostled. You finally opened the door and entered the hallway. A single elderly Mary was making her way down the hall, and she gave you a smile as you passed by.
Don't look so glum, dear. I'm certain things will look up from here. A new beginning awaits us all. You just need to find it and open the door to your new future.
You paused a moment, digesting the elderly Mare's words, but when you turned to thank her, she was gone. You blinked several times as you looked down at the empty hall, wondering where she had gone. But you dismissed it from your mind, knowing it wasn't really important. Her words were worth thinking about, though. As you resumed walking, you caught glimpses of the platform through the windows, and you could make out a large number of ponies waiting to board. You finally stepped off the train, and you looked up at the sky above. Quickly, though, you averted your gaze, not wanting to remind you of what you couldn't have. As you began to walk away from the train, you spotted a pair of earth ponies boarding the train, one of whom was wearing a Stetson hat, and the other a grayish-brown coat. It didn't take you long to get out of the station and into the streets of Ponyville. Already there were some shopkeepers heading to their stores and stalls, readying themselves for another day of business. You began weaving your way through the crowds, not quite sure where your cousin lived, hoping you'd find her somehow. Most of the ponies you saw offered you a friendly wave, and you always made sure to reciprocate the wave, knowing that a good first impression would always make integration into the town immensely helpful. Based on the letters you had received over the past few months, you knew that your cousin was well known throughout the town, but you didn't want to rely on that to find her. Eventually, you found yourself standing before a massive tree in the middle of town, but you knew that this is just one of the many landmarks throughout the town. Without a second thought, you began walking down one of the streets, having chosen at random which one to take. It was a win-win, really. If you didn't find your cousin's home, at least you'd be able to know the layout of the town well enough. While walking along the streets, you found yourself nose-to-nose with an energetic pink mare. Her eyes widened as she spotted you, and you took a hesitant step backwards, not quite sure how to react to the sudden change in the pink mare. Before she spotted you, she had been quite happily hopping along the street, but now she was just looking at you, her eyes widening rapidly. You opened your mouth to speak, but before you could get a single word out, the mare dashed off, leaving a cloud of dust in the shape of her body. You couldn't begin to fathom what this could mean, and so you simply wrote it off as a dash of eccentricity as in an otherwise peaceful town. Several minutes later, you come across one of the most particular buildings you've ever seen. You read the letters about it, but there was no amount of literary description that could ever do justice to the sugar dream that was Sugar Cube Corner. The entire building appeared to be made out of candy, and even smelled like candy. You stood before it for several minutes, simply trying to rationalize the construction behind the building, as you were well aware of the fact that nothing about this building was sensible for construction. You gave a large shrug as you moved past it, content to leave it as it is. As you continued to explore the town, you found more and more things that struck you as being odd. You decided to ignore them, seeing as how all the ponies in town seemed to go their business as normal. Maybe this is normal. Maybe Philadelphia's a weird place. Eventually, you find yourself standing in front of a festive-looking building, designed to look like a carousel of some sort. Your assumption proved correct, as you were spotted a sign labeling the building as the Carousel Boutique. You've heard about this place from your cousin, as you so figured that the owner was nice as the letters had led you to believe. It was worth a shot. You raised your hoof to knock on the door, but the door swung open just before your hoof could make contact. Unfortunately for you, the unexpected opening left your rapidly moving hoof nowhere to go, except for into the face of the mare that opened the door. You managed to slow your hoof some, so instead of punching her in the face, you ended up simply poking her on the nose. Unable to process how stupid you looked, you left your hoof where it was. The strikingly blue eyes of the mare narrowed quickly as you realized that you hadn't moved your hoof, so you quickly pulled it away, hoping that you hadn't made a total ass of yourself. A filly came up to the doorway, and she looked at you with bloodshot eyes, suddenly figured out how awkward this whole situation was. Did I come at a bad time? Your voice comes out shakily, unsure how bad things could go.
No, dear, I was just about to mail a letter, and were you hoping to purchase some clothing, perhaps?
Her accent reminded you of the snobby ponies that you met in the past, but you wouldn't let that get in the way of meeting a new pony. Before you could reply, though, the little filly began speaking.
How could you be going out to mail one of those mushy love letters at a time like this? Scoodle's breaking down mentally, and Toupee and Applejack are going to Mainhead to do Celestia knows what, and you're here writing love letters to some stallion you've never met before? Sweetie, please calm down. I'm aware of the situation. I don't need you yelling at me because of it. Toupee and Applejack are going to Manhattan with the intention of solving the problems here. I have some faith in those two.
The mare sat down in her speech, and she embraced the filly who you could only assume was his sister, or daughter. Given the way the filly spoke to the mare, you assumed sister. After a few awkward moments, you finally cleared your throat. I hate to break up this moment, but I was actually hoping to ask a question of you.
Oh my!
The mare quickly stood up, blushing at the display she had unwittingly put on.
So, yes, what was it you needed? Clothing? Fashion tips? Or something else?
Yeah, I was hoping you knew how to get to my cousin's house. She's fairly known from what I've been told through her letters. Her name's Fluttershy, if that helps. The mare let out a gasp, and she gave you a big smile.
So you're that cousin she always talks about all the time. I'll take you to her right away. She must be dying to see you.
Well, actually, she doesn't know I'm coming. It's a bit of a surprise. I'm here for a while, and I was hoping that she'd be willing to let me stay with her while I'm here.
If you even have to ask that, you don't know Fluttershy very well at all. Now, come with me. We'll stop at the post office quickly, and then I'll take you to Fluttershy's cottage.
She turned to look back to her sister, and she spoke once more.
Now, sweetie, I know you're worried about Scootaloo, and I'm certain that Toupee and Applejack will be more than capable of fixing what Toupee broke. Although I don't really see how they will.
You had no idea who Toupee was, but the name Applejack was familiar enough. She was a friend of Fluttershy's, as well as an element of harmony. What they had to do with some filly named Scootaloo you could only begin to guess, but based on the condition of Sweetie Belle, you figured it was something bad.
Right, sweetie, you make sure that any pony that comes by knows I'll be back soon. Should I resist her, I'll be back in less than an hour.
Sweetie simply frowned at her sister, but she also nodded.
Good. Now then, shall we go?
You nod, and the mare takes the lead, you following her just a few steps behind her. Excuse me, miss, but I don't know your name, and I feel kind of foolish not knowing how to address you. The mare stopped dead in her tracks, and she turned to look at you.
Right. Well, my name is Rarity, purveyor of the Carousel Boutique. Perhaps you may also know me as the Element of Generosity. Although I don't care much for bandying about the title, I prefer to earn my fame through my work.
Well, Miss Rarity, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Now that I got a face to associate with your name, I'll be more likely to remember it. Fluttershy does talk to you about... Fluttershy does talk about you quite a bit in her letters. How you're so generous and the way you design clothing.
Fluttershy talks about me?
The two of you began walking away once again. This time, you stayed at Rarity's side rather than behind her.
Oh, do tell me what she says.
Well, she told me that you bravely faced the Diamond Dogs when you were kidnapped, and then she told me about some time you spent with Storm, and the whole fiasco regarding that. Honestly, the letters were never about you or any of her friends specifically. They were just ways for us keeping in contact. After I moved from Cloudsdale, contact with her became harder and harder. You sigh, thinking back to the familiar, tense departure from Cloudsdale. My father and her father were brothers, and they had a massive falling out. That fight is what caused us to move to Philadelphia. We stayed here for a couple days while the move was being settled, but I only remember spending some time playing in the streets.
That's awful, dear. But did you like Philadelphia? From what I've heard, it's not exactly a pleasant city.
You grimace for a moment before you bring a small smile to your face. It's not that bad. You just need to know what you're doing and how to do it. Besides, I was kept away from the worst of the city had to offer due to the training program I was in.
What program was that?
It was some pre-Wonderbolts kind of thing. The best flyers get admitted, and then the top trainee of each class gets to audition for the Wonderbolts. I was set to be that trainee, but then I came here. I'd rather not elaborate on why, though. You raise a hoof, knowing that Rarity is poised to ask questions. Maybe, later, I can explain myself. But, for now, I'd just like to get to Fluttershy's home. I've been traveling for a while, and I don't sleep well on trains. She smiles back, and you look ahead.
I understand, dear. I won't pry.
You smile back at her, content with the present. You'll have to explain yourself about what happened eventually, but for now, you're free to live without a care. Soon enough, you arrived at the post office. Just before you could open the door, a gray Pegasus strode through the door. Her eyes were looking in two different directions, and you couldn't stop yourself from staring. After a moment, you noticed that the two eyes were coming to focus on you. You blushed fiercely. My apologies. I've never seen something quite like that, and I couldn't stop myself from looking. The glare that was forming on the mare's face quickly vanished, and she smiled. Don't worry. I've gotten my fair share of looks, and there are only few ponies who actually bother me when they do it. I'm just glad you apologized. Now, I have some mail to deliver, so I'll talk with the two of you later. Before she left, though, she leaned close to Rarity, and she whispered in her ear. You could see a blush form on the cheeks of the white unicorn, and then she gasped. Ditzy! This is not the stallion I've been sending letters to.
That stallion is a refined and elegant unicorn. He's the pinnacle of grace and elegance.
She quickly looked at you and blushed further.
Not that this fine, gentle stallion is not any of those things.
You raise a hoof and chuckle. Hey, don't mind me. I've had worse insults thrown my way. After a few more whispered words, the Pegasus took the letter from Rarity, and she galloped a short distance before taking flight. You watched her fly for a moment before you looked back to Rarity. Well, now that your letter is taken care of, would you lead the way to Fluttershy's home? I've been to the whole town, and I can't find the cottage she described.
Fluttershy doesn't live in town, dear. She has a cottage near the Everfree Forest, where she takes care of all of her animal friends.
You nod, remembering the fact that Fluttershy was going on about her animal friends, especially her one bunny she adoringly referred to as Angel Bunny. Right, I always thought she lived in town, though. Several minutes passed in silence as you made your way through the town, and down the dirt path that led to Fluttershy's home. The openness of the area gave you an unparalleled view of the lush forest and rolling hills. This whole place was so different to Philadelphia that it was hard to explain how this place and Philadelphia could exist on the same planet. As you continued, you eventually spotted a small rise in the distance, but it seemed to be emitting smoke.
And there's Fluttershy's home.
As you got closer, you began to make out some details, and then you could make out some windows in the door. Fluttershy had always described her home as being natural. Well, this was taking it to an extreme. The whole thing seemed to be part of the landscape around it. And then you noticed all the woodland creatures roaming around the house, all the grassy hills around it. There were more animals than you could ever hope to count, and the variety was just staggering. The only time you ever seen this much wildlife in one place was when you went to the zoo in Philadelphia, and you had only done that once, as the animals seemed so sad. Finally, you crossed a small bridge and you approached the door. You prepared to try your hoof once again at knocking on the door. You stood before the door, poised to knock, and your hoof began its descent, only for it to open at the very last minute. This better not be a thing for me. You managed to slow your hoof down again, and you wound up with your hoof resting on the mare's nose. Again. Fluttershy's entire body went rigid at your contact, and you could see that she was staring at your hoof, fear in her eyes. Hi, Fluttershy, it's me. You remember good old... Before you could finish, though, Fluttershy fell over on her side, her eyes rolling into the back of her head. You watched her do all this, with your hoof still up in the air, idiotically pressing against where Fluttershy's nose was a moment ago. You turned to look at Rarity, but she wasn't there. You quickly looked back to Fluttershy, and you saw Rarity crouching over the prone form of her friend. She looked at you with an apologetic smile on her face. Was it something I said? Chapter 2. Oddly Vulnerable. Oh, and a little note. My voice in the first part was actually really hurting, and it's still hurting now, so don't expect a whole lot out of my performance. You just watched as Rarity attended to the unconscious form of Fluttershy. It was taking some time for Rarity to wake Fluttershy, so you took the time to wander the exterior of her home, taking in the sights that were made available to you. You took a few steps back from the door, and you turned to admire the vast emptiness. Back in Philadelphia, there's no open spaces quite like this. Off in the distance, you could see mountains, slowly itching their way towards the vastness of the open sky. You could see Canterlot in the distance, framed elegantly on the side of the mountain. You had been looking forward to traveling there with the Wonderbolts, but, well, things didn't quite go as planned. You could only just make out the towers of the castle against the mountain, and you took a moment to count all of them. With that minute task done, you turned and looked at the cottage Fluttershy called home. From the outside, it looked almost like part of nature. Every aspect of the small home cried out back that the inhabitant was one with nature. The many wooden creatures that roamed about her home did so with such a sense of freedom that you could clearly hardly believe it. These creatures moved about without a care in the world, as if they knew that their protector would never slack in her duties. From what Fluttershy had said in her letters, though, you knew that she didn't often have to actually act as a protector. She acted more as a caretaker. As you continued your trip around the house, you could see large creatures in the back. There was a deer there, along with a few badgers and even a platypus. They all looked at you as you came into view, but they quickly returned to what they were doing. You walked close to them, expecting them to bolt, but none of them seemed to care that you were there. As you approached the deer, you raised your hoof towards it. It froze, looking right at you, and then your hoof. You stopped raising your hoof and looked back at the deer. Its eyes weren't filled with the same spark you saw in the other ponies, but there was something there nevertheless. You began moving your hoof once again, not breaking eye contact with the deer. You bring your hoof to the top of its head and you stroke it a few times, and then somehow you notice a subtle change in the atmosphere. It almost feels like you're being tested somehow. With your test complete, and apparently passed, you resumed your walk around the cottage until you finally returned to the front door, where both mares were missing. You stare at the spot harder, somehow hoping that your intense glare would intensify where the two mares had gone. A soft giggle inside breaks your concentration, and then you heave a sigh. You walk inside slowly, taking care not to make any sudden move, lest you startle Fluttershy once again. As you enter the room, you hear a muted conversation abruptly stop as you spot the mares, and they spot you. Fluttershy looking towards you, but most of her face is hidden behind her mane, while Rarity is looking between you and Fluttershy with an amused expression on her face. You meet Fluttershy's gaze, and you take a few steps forward before you stop before her. You remember me, right? Her mumbled words barely reach you, but you think you hear an affirmative answer in there. And what's my name? Again, her muffled voice reaches you, and you nod. And how do we greet family members in our family? A mumbled response is all you get, and you frowned. I'm sorry, what was that? The response comes out louder this time, but it's still too muffled for you to hear. If you don't take the initiative, I'll do what Grandpa did before he passed. This seems to shock Fluttershy enough for you to get her to react. She gives you a warm hug, and her mane tickling your cheek. It's been too long, Flutters. You break the hug after a moment, and then you see that she's still hiding behind her mane. I may have taken my father's side when our fathers fought, but I don't hold it against you. She smiles, and then she responds.
Actually, Uncle Swift was right, Dad. Her father wasn't always as level-headed as he wanted to think. I don't mean to be rude, though.
You smile back, and you hug Fluttershy again. She lets out a soft squeak, and you can't help but chuckle the tiniest bit. Well, I have to say that my dad is just as bad as yours, if not worse. You pull back from the hug before you look at Fluttershy. You see, he kicked me out a couple days ago, and so I came here, hoping that hoping to stay with you until I get back on my hooves. A gasp escapes the pastel yellow mare, and you take half a step back, having never heard Fluttershy get quite that loud before.
What happened to make Uncle Swift kick you out? Does it have to do with Father in some way? I could talk to him if you want.
No, Flutters, don't worry about it. It's nothing to do with you. It's my fault. Through all of this, Rarity maintained her silence, but she finally got up to the couch and came over.
What did you do that would want to make your father kick you out? Was it so bad that he could hardly no longer bear to house you?
Well, I was a member of the Wonderbolts Training Initiative, pretty much a camp for Pegasi who wanted to join the Wonderbolts. I was lined up to be the next trainee to perform exclusively for a chance of being admitted. It was the best time of my life to finally have a chance to join the Wonderbolts, but then there was a weather accident. For the most part, the weather in Philadelphia was taken care of days in advance, using some sort of advanced unicorn magic in combination with Pegasi magic. Sadly, there was a fluke that no pony caught. And so there was a freak lightning storm that struck, and I was unlucky enough to be caught in it while doing some training work for the program. You pause, thinking back to the panic and mayhem that occurred during those harrowing 15 minutes. There was about 10 of us up in the air when the storm started, and so we all began diving towards the ground, but we were, admittedly, higher than we should have been. I was showing off, well, flying higher than any others. You look between the two mares, and you can see they are hanging off your every word. I'm not too proud to admit it, but I was the one goading them all to try and beat me, so I take responsibility for what happened. As we began diving, the storm thickened faster than we could have anticipated, and so we were cut off from a direct drop to the ground below. I reasoned that with enough speed we could punch through the cloud layer, and so the others trusted my judgment. A soft laugh escapes you as you think back to the stupidity of your decision. It turns out the clouds that make up a lightning storm are a bit thicker and stronger than normal clouds. Still, I managed to punch through, but not before I was hit with several bolts of lightning. The pain was intense, and I lost consciousness several times as I plummeted to the ground. My wings refused to respond, and my friends were nowhere to be seen. I thought it was the end. But then, through the clouds, came two of my friends, their dives passing through the hole I created. They caught up to me quickly, and then we landed. I was taken to the hospital, and after a few days, the doctors finally delivered the grim news. You sigh, trying once again to do something with your wings, but there was no response, just as you expected. The wing itself is fine, as is the muscle. The damage was done to the nerve endings that allow me to control my wings. They no longer carry the signal, so I can feel my wings, I just can't control them.
And Uncle Swift?
Fluttershy didn't actually ask a question, but you could tell that she wanted to just by her voice. My father was distraught, to say the least. He was hoping that I'd be our family's quick way to fame, but with the loss of my flight, that dream was shattered. He spent tons of money trying to find a procedure that could return my wings to me, but none of them were promising enough, and the ones that were, he couldn't afford. The fights about the money were always the worst. Things were tense for quite some time, and then, just a few days ago, my father finally snapped. He claimed that he had wasted all of his time and money on me, and then I blew it all with some stupid stunt. Rarity and Fluttershy were both watching. Rarity nearly in tears, and Fluttershy's face was frozen in a mask of dismay mixed with disgust. You couldn't tell which of the two were more dominant emotions, but it really didn't matter either. With a sigh, you looked to the ceiling, not wanting to face you. The manager continued. So he just kicked me out. It wasn't even a big scream fight like I was expecting. He just said that I had to leave, so I grabbed my only possessions I have and I left. A few days later, and here I am. Despite the nature of your tale, you found your voice lacking any real, definite emotion. It's not a happy tale, and it's also one I didn't want to have to recount many times. You turned and looked back to Rarity. She offered you a faint smile. I waited to explain earlier because I didn't want to explain it to you, and then to Fluttershy. Both mares still seemed unable to speak, so you waited patiently for them to gather their wits about them. Fluttershy was the first to compose herself, and she began crying as she embraced you.
You lost your wings?
Her voice came out groped with emotion, and you did your best to counsel her.
But flying is who you are. How can you bear it?
Before you could respond to Fluttershy's question, Rarity throws her hooves around you as well, tears on her face.
Dear, that's awful. And then you had to be kicked out because of it.
Girls, it's okay. Despite the pressure from my father, I eventually accepted the fact that I'm grounded. I'm not happy about it, but there's nothing I can reasonably do. The process involved repairing the extensive nerve damage would take an immense amount of magic and several days' worth of work. All the ponies that offered the procedure charged more for the operations than I could have made as a Wonderbolt in a year. The embrace lasted several minutes, and by the time it ended, both mares had recovered. Now then, if neither of you mind, I'd like to try to get some rest. I've had a long trip here, and I'd like to try to catch up with some lost sleep. I'd be more than happy to meet the rest of your friends later, Flutters, but for now, I just want to get some sleep. It's still too early, too, and so just wake me sometime this afternoon.
Okay, I don't have a guest bed made up, so if you want, you can use mine, if that's okay with you.
You nod, unwilling to be a burden on your cousin. Several minutes later, you were lying on Fluttershy's bed as she walked out of the room.
I'll come and wake you up sometime this afternoon. Try to get some rest. Oh, I'm glad you're here. It's been too long.
She gently closed the door to the room, and within minutes you were in the place between wakefulness and sleep, and shortly after, that sleep finally swept in and claimed your mind. A gentle nudge brought your awareness back into the real world. You cracked open an eye to see the soft yellow flare of Fluttershy.
It's time for you to get up, sleepyhead. My other friends are all eager to meet you.
You sat up in bed slowly, not wanting to rush yourself. With a grunt, you fell out of bed and onto your side. I'm gonna need a few minutes to get ready, Fluttershy. She gives you a small smile, and she nods as well.
Okay, the bathroom's just across the hall. Just come down when you're ready.
You do your best to get up. You do your best to get comfortable on the floor after Fluttershy left, but the unyielding nature of the hardwood flooring made comfort an unfortunate impossibility. With a heavy sigh, you got up and headed for the bathroom to freshen up. It took about half an hour, but by the time you exited the bathroom, you actually thought you looked pretty good. You ruffled your mane just a bit to get settled in the way you liked, and then you made your way downstairs. Fluttershy was sitting on a couch, talking with the woodland critters that she shared her home, and you approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up to you as you approached, and she had a large smile on her face. I'm ready to go, Fluttershy. She nodded at you, and then she got off the couch, and the various critters fled to their respective homes, leaving just you and her in the room. She started over the door, and then she opened it, gesturing you to take the lead. As you stood outside her home, she quickly closed the door before she stood next to you.
I hope you read the letters that I sent you. Some of my friends are a bit quirky.
You gave Fluttershy a warm smile as you responded. I read all the letters you sent me, and I grew up for the most part in Philadelphia. I think I can handle whatever quirks your friends have. But which ones am I going to be meeting? Based on your letters, you have more friends here than there are ponies in Philadelphia. Fluttershy chuckled softly at your joke, and you were glad that she did.
I don't have many friends, but we're just going to meet up with a few of my closest friends. Twilight will be there, Pinkie Pie, Rainbow Dash, Storm, and Rarity, who you already met.
The name Pinkie Pie strikes you, and for a moment you struggle to remember just who that pony was. Pinkie. That name seems familiar.
Yeah, she's the biggest party pony you could ever hope to meet. You may have seen her earlier. Since she said she was talking about some new ponies she'd seen in town.
Yeah, I think I did see her. She's all pink, poofy mane. Fluttershy just nodded and you smiled. Yeah, I met her. I was looking for your home, although I didn't really meet her so much as she saw me, gasped, and then ran off. You fall silent for a while, slowly putting together tidbits you recall from your letters you've been getting. She's throwing me a party, isn't she? A soft giggle comes from Fluttershy, and you just sigh and roll your eyes. Yeah, that's what I thought. The rest of the trip to town passes in silence, and you're glad for it. Despite your normal confidence, you found yourself being oddly vulnerable. From what you've read in Fluttershy's letters, these parties were always thrown for newcomers in town. You weren't really worried about the party, though. You've been to your fair share of wild parties with the other trainees. some a bit less legal than you'd ever admit. What had you worried was the Pegasus mare by the name of Rainbow Dash. From what you had remembered, she was just recently admitted to the team, and so you were fairly certain that she had heard at least a little bit about you from your team. That would lead to questions that you'd rather not have to answer. Hopefully she'd understand that you didn't want to talk about it. Hopefully. But the other friends that Fluttershy had, you were generally interested in getting to know them. According to the letters you have gotten, they were all attractive and had great personalities. And what made the deal even better was the fact that they were all single. Hey, maybe you'd get lucky and hit it off with one of them. With your thoughts distracted, you didn't notice that you'd arrived at the treehouse that you'd seen earlier. Fluttershy approached the door with a slow trot, and you matched her pace. She put one hoof on the door, and then she opened it. Inside it was dark, and you knew it was coming. You braced yourself against the coming onslaught of voices, but it never came. Instead, there was a gentle sound of music along some chatting voices. What? No surprise party for me?
No, silly! You knew it was coming, so you knew it wouldn't be a surprise.
You fell backwards as the pink mare from earlier surprisingly appeared before you.
I'll just throw you a surprise party later. But for now, I think we just enjoy a regular party.
As you waited for your heart to slow down a bit, you saw Fluttershy laugh, and Pinkie went back into the party. Flutters, you have some really interesting friends. Really, really interesting friends. Chapter 3. The First Exam. As you entered with Fluttershy following right behind you, you noticed all the ponies in the room turned to look at you. There was even a tiny purple dragon who you recalled was named Spike. Your abrupt entrance brought the entire festivities to a halt, and you felt the awkwardness grow by the moment. You drew in a breath to get things started on the right hoof. Sadly, fate conspired against you.
Hey, you're the cousin of Fluttershy's that's going to be a Wonderbolt. I've heard quite a bit about you.
You watched as the Cayenne Pegasus walked over to stand close to you, and she had a fierce glint in her eye.
So when do you want to race? I'm itching to race some pony who can keep up with me.
The gray Pegasus hangs his head muttering, but you can't quite make out what he says. Actually, I wanted to get something out of the way first. It has to do with me, and it's not the happiest news. Rainbow Dash's head tilted as you spoke, and you could see that she was genuinely curious. The same as the other ponies who hadn't heard. You explained quickly and efficiently what happened to you. You left out some of the more emotional bits, wanting to spare the ponies their emotions, but even without that, there were few dry eyes. As you finished, an awkward silence descended upon the room, and you decided that this wouldn't do, considering this was supposed to be a party. Come on, every pony. I've moved on, and I'm okay with what's happened. It sucks, that's true, but I don't let that rule my life. Now, Pinkie, would you mind getting some music going? This party's in dire need of some uplifting music. The pink pony cheered up rapidly as you spoke. By the time you finished speaking, she was already looking much as she did when you first saw her. After a few moments, most of the tension had dissolved, and you began chatting with Fluttershy's friends. They were remarkably easy to talk to, and that improved the environment drastically. You found yourself speaking more to Twilight than any of other Fluttershy's friends. But you didn't mind, since she was actually quite knowledgeable. Eventually your conversation did come back to your wings, and you explained to her what the doctors had told you, and your family. And Twilight asked some questions that you couldn't answer, and she just furrowed her brow when you were unable to answer her questions. After a few hours, the party began to wind down, and Rarity was the first to depart, claiming she had quite a bit of work to catch up on, and that she had to make sure that the Crusaders, whom you've already heard through some of Fluttershy's letters, didn't demolish her boutique. Rainbow Dash and Storm were the next to leave, and they did so with quite a few innuendos shot back and forth between you and Storm, leaving Fluttershy a massive blush on her cheeks. Despite his odd mannerisms, you found that you got along with Storm quite well. And she was by far the most reluctant to see the party end. She swore that the next party she'd throw would be bigger and last longer, and that she'd be sure to show you her party cannon. After Pinkie was out the door, you looked at Fluttershy and Twilight, a questioning look plastered on your face. Party cannon? In response, you just got a simple shake of Twilight's head, and a similar response from Fluttershy. The three of you spoke for a short while longer, and Fluttershy let out a yawn, but you couldn't help but smile at the adorableness of your cousin. You weren't feeling all that tired, mostly due to your nap earlier, and so when Fluttershy made her way to the door, you didn't join her. Not really feeling all that tired, Flutters. And if Twilight doesn't mind, I wouldn't object to spending a bit more time with her. As you finished, you turned to look at Twilight, and you could swear you saw the tiniest blush on her cheeks. It faded quickly, though, and you weren't entirely sure that it was even there.
Oh, okay, I mean, if Twilight doesn't mind.
Not at all, Fluttershy. Your cousin seems quite verbose and equivalent to boot.
If you'd like to stay, I'd be more than happy to entertain his company for a bit longer. Oh, well, okay. Don't stay out too late, though. I mean, unless you want to. It's just that my home is a bit hard to find when it gets dark.
Don't worry, Fluttershy. I'll stay safe. And if it gets too dark out, I'd like to think that Twilight has a couch I can call a bed for a night. Again, you look to the mare, and she nods her assent. See, we have a solution. Now you get home, Shy. If I don't get back tonight, I'll be there tomorrow. With a gentle latching sound, the door closes behind Fluttershy, leaving you sitting across from Twilight at the table she had put out in the main room of the library. It wasn't particularly a large table, and so it made a good position for conversation. However, Twilight stood up from the table, and she motioned for you to follow her. You did so, slightly confused of why she wanted to leave the comfort of the seats you've already been in. You discovered why. She led you to a cozier private study. It's not what you think. Shut up. It was a fairly small room, large enough for a few ponies to comfortably occupy. The most attractive features of the room, though, were the twin armchairs in the room, and the fireplace they were both facing. There was no fire at present, but you were certain lighting it would be no problem for Twilight. She moved to the fireplace as you entered, and within moments there was a sizable blaze in the hearth, warming the room. It wasn't the most uncomfortable heat, despite the season. She then settled down in one of the armchairs, and you did the same with the other. The leather of the chair, fox feathers, you assumed, was well worn, and had a smell of books about it. It wasn't all that unpleasant, and it actually made the room even more comfortable. With the main items of interest in the room accounted for, you allow your gaze to roam to the rest of the room. The walls were, unsurprisingly, covered with countless tomes, but what got your interest was the fact that there were so many repeats. They weren't repeated in this room, but they were identical copies out in the main library of the room. Twilight, I've noticed that you seem to have repeat copies of some of the books that I recall seeing in the main room.
Oh, yes. I have the first edition copies in this room, as well as some of the original author's notes. I even have a few autographed copies of some of the books that are out of print in this room. Always had a great love for written word, and due to my relationship with the princess, I have an unrivaled access to most obscure pieces of literature. I even have some of the books that were written by Star Swirl himself.
Your mind races with the mention of that name. You find yourself trying to recall what you can about the long-dead unicorn. Wasn't it Star Swirl known for his work with teleportation magic? Unicorn's eyes widen at your recollection, and a smile quickly joins her widened eyes.
Yes, actually, he is one of the early pioneers of the magical field. His work paved the way for the final development of the spell. He even did a measure of work in the fields, ranging from elemental manipulation to healing.
The mare fell silent as she spoke those last few words, and you noticed that she was looking at you with a look in her eyes that you couldn't quite place. A faint glow surrounded her horn, then a book floated over to her, and she quickly began flipping through it. You sat in silence, unsure what she was doing. You could guess what she was going to say, but you didn't get your hopes up. After several minutes of her search, she finally let out a short laugh of triumph. However, it was short-lived, and then her brow furrowed as she continued reading, in silence, other than her outburst was calming, though. Several more minutes passed, and then you heard a soft sound of a book being closed. You looked over to the mare, and she had a faint smile on her face.
If you don't mind, I'd like to take a moment to examine your wings. If what I've read is to be believed, then there may be a way to heal the damage that has been done to your wings.
The unicorn was about to continue, but you raised a hoof, cutting her off. Yes, there are several different methods available to repair the damage that's been done. If the doctors are to be trusted, then they all require absurdly large amounts of magic to work, and the time it takes is also fairly large. But the estimates I've heard range from 10 to 12 days, assuming that I had a different unicorn for each procedure. It's not just a doable thing, Twilight. Her ears drooped as you spoke, and you felt bad for crushing her idea so badly. I suppose you could take a look, if you like. Just nothing overly invasive. Her ears pick up again, and she had a larger smile on her face.
Don't worry, I won't do anything bad. I'm just going to use my magic to examine those inner pathways of your nerves. I'll also do a cursory examination of the exterior to see if there's anything outwardly visible.
She climbs from the chair, and she moves over to you, waiting for you to extract yourself from the comfortable chair of the seat. With a small sigh, you relent, and a moment later you are standing before the curious mare. She quickly uses her magic to stretch out both wings. Before a fleeting moment, you feel a tug on your memories, but you squash them before they can develop, knowing that nothing would ever come from what this mare does. She's not a miracle worker, and I doubt that she has the magical reserves to do what needed to be done to cure what ails my body. The magical pulsations that run through your wings bring odd sensations to them. You have to struggle not to pull away from the grip that encases them. As you watch the mare work, her attention to detail begins to work against you. As her gentle touches take on a less than chaste feeling, you bite your tongue to keep you from saying anything, knowing that what she was doing was for your benefit. Soon enough, the sensations begin to escalate, and the mare subconsciously begins working along your wing in time with the magic pulsations. Twilight?
Yes?
Her response is one that you would hear from somebody who's responding only to the noise, but not the intent behind it. You do realize what you're doing, right? I mean, this is a bit fast, isn't it? Shouldn't we get to know each other a bit first? The mare pauses several long seconds. Finally, she looks at you, and notices the blush present on your cheeks. Her own cheeks quickly flush deep crimson, and the magical hold in your wing drops away rapidly, allowing them to fall limply at your side. You had only been hoping that they'd stay extended, despite the awkwardness that would have come from that situation. Even if they'd only do what they were supposed to do in situations like that, there'd still be your wings. They'd work, if only a little.
Oh my! I'm so sorry. I wasn't paying attention to that. I was just examining and...
Her blush deepens, and she carefully comprehends what she was doing. You laugh at her reaction, hoping to ease the tension. She joins you a moment later, although her laugh seems a bit more forced. Twilight, it's fine. Trust me. I could feel what you're doing, and it has to count for something. Even if I can't use them for flight, I can still use them for... well, I'll still be able to get some use out of them.
I didn't mean to do what I was doing. If you want to go, I understand.
You reach a hoof over to the mare's cheek, and she lets you. Twilight, if you're intent on trying to do something about my wings, then this is something that'll come up from time to time. Despite what Fluttershy may have told you about me, I'm not actually great with the mares, and that's the most I've gotten in quite some time. You feel a blush on your cheek, and you offer up a weak smile.
Actually, told us all that you had lousy luck with mares you wanted to go out with. Something about the way you deliver your pickup lines.
Your cheeks feel as if they're on fire, and you can only guess just how great your blush is. Oh, it seems I may need to have a chat with Fluttershy then. You pause a moment, and then sigh. But she's right, sadly. You stew in your misery for a moment before you quickly pick yourself back up. But we're not here to talk about my luck with getting a date. We're here to socialize. But now that we're doing something more for constructive. If you're willing to try again, Twi, I'm willing to deal with the sensations involved with you examining my wings. She looked up to you, hesitantly, and then you saw a glow begin to form around her horn.
If you're sure.
You nod in response, and she gives you a smile. The glow around her horn intensifies for a moment, and then your wings stretch out once again. This time, though, she spends more time near where the wing meets your side. You do everything in your power to think this is a doctor's visit, rather than an attractive mare touching your wings. A dissatisfied grunt came from Twilight, and you turned your head to see that her staring intently at a small patch of fur that you'd never really paid attention to before. She brought her horn close to it, and a tiny spark leapt from her horn to her body, and for the tiniest moment, a span of time so short you could have imagined it, you felt your flight muscles move. But that moment was enough for you. A tear ran down your cheek, another spark left from her horn, and you were looking forward to the sensation of motion once again, but it didn't come. This repeated several more times, but the motion never came again. She repeated the process with your other wing, but the motion never came. As the aura surrounding your wings dissipate, the mare lets out a sigh. You waited for the magic to fade completely before you began the laborious task of refolding your wings. It took several minutes to do, and by the time you finished, all you had was a fading memory of the sensations brought about by Twilight's touch. You took your previous place in the armchair, and Twilight approached you attentively.
That twitch, it's the best sign we have. I think I'll be able to help, but it'll take some time. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to fly again.
You just looked at the mare for a moment, and you got off your chair and embraced her in a hug. Okay. A little word of warning. I have to do an emotional voice, and I'm not good at doing a sad emotional voice. It's been so long since I had hope of flying again, but you reignited that fire within me. I don't know how I can hope to repay you for this. I wasn't that emotional, but oh well. You broke the hug and you looked at her, at a loss for words.
You don't need to pay me for this. I'm just trying to help a friend in need.
She smiled at you, and then she glanced past you, and her jaw dropped.
Oh my, it's nearly midnight. Perhaps I'd be good to get to bed.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good idea, but I'm not going to just let you do this for me and without paying you back somehow. And if you can't think of something, then I'll just have to get creative. You had the tiniest spark of an idea forming in your head. You began formulating just how to repay Twilight for her kindness. But for now, I agree. It'll be good to get some rest. You took the lead, holding the door open for Twilight. And soon, the two of you were in the main room, looking at the couch you'd be calling a bed for the night.
I have a guest room. You can use it if you like. The couch isn't exactly the most comfortable place to spend the night.
That would be much better. Thank you. As Twilight took the lead towards the guest room, you spotted an ice cream container under the table you'd been at earlier. You prod Twilight and point your hoof, and she gets a cross expression on her face. I think a certain dragon had a bit of a sweet tooth while we were busy.
That's certainly how it seems. Anyway, the guest room's just down the hall.
She points towards a short hall, and you nod.
There's a bathroom right across from the bedroom, so you don't have to worry about getting lost. And I'll come by tomorrow morning to wake you for breakfast.
Thank you, once again. It seems I have quite a bit to repay before we're done with my wings. Twilight just giggles in response, and then she levitates the empty ice cream cart into the kitchen. A moment later, she comes to the kitchen and begins making her way up the stairs. You go to watch her. Good night, Twi.
Good night. Pleasant dreams.
You smile as you turn your head down the short hallway. It only takes you a few minutes to get ready for bed, and soon enough you're curled up beneath the blankets waiting for sleep to claim your conscious mind. When sleep finally does take you, you enjoy the first flying dream you've had since you lost your wings. Heyo, every pony, it's me again. This is the end of part 1 of 6, and I'd like to say thank you again to Jet Howitzer, if he's listening to this, for letting me do a dramatic reading of this epic fan fiction. I will talk to you again on part 2, which will be posted by next Sunday. Or this Sunday. Next Sunday. That's the proper phrase I was looking for. Whatever. Bye.